Apocalypse Now, Full Metal Jacket, and Platoon. These three films are what many people would consider to be the greatest Vietnam War films of all time, or at least the most influential. In Apocalypse Now and Full Metal Jacket, the two main characters are forced to fend off the darkness of war or risk losing their souls. In Coppola's film, it is the chaos Woolard encounters on the river and the haunting monologues of Kurtz that push him towards the belief that war cannot be fought with one-foot grounded morality. To destroy your enemy, you must fully commit to the spirit of war. In Full Metal Jacket, we watch Joker operate in a squadron made of men who have become slaves to their animal instincts. All of Joker's fellow Marines expect him to behave just like themselves, especially Animal Mother, and Joker is forced to overcome his instincts and be merciful in a situation where he has no right to be. Neither Apocalypse Now or Full Metal Jacket has a moral anchor that tries to prevent the main character from drifting towards insanity, but the same cannot be said for Platoon, and that is what makes the story uniquely compelling. At the center of the struggle for Taylor's soul is one word: courage. Half of the platoon sides with Elias, and the other half sides with Barnes. The determining factor of where each soldier ends up is how they define that word. But before we dive into that discussion, let's start at the very beginning. Just like the main character Chris Taylor, Oliver Stone enlisted in the army, and when he signed up to fight in Vietnam, Stone said that there was intrigue and curiosity, and he also wanted to carry on the family tradition of serving his country, but when he entered combat, those feelings vanished quickly. Stone visualizes this experience very efficiently in Platoon. When Taylor gets off the plane, the very first thing he sees are body bags and injured soldiers, and unlike FMJ or Apocalypse Now, there's no build-up before Taylor steps into the jungle. We are thrown right in there with him. And I'm curious, since I know some Vietnam veterans have watched my videos, did Platoon capture the experience well? And if there were any scenes you thought were a little over the top, definitely let me know in the comments section. Now, Taylor describes to his grandmother that the men he's with, they're the forgotten men of the country, men from small towns who would be destined for a cookie-cutter life if they didn't come to Vietnam. The Romans used to call these people the head count, men who show up in the population number, but really nothing else. And being a new guy, Taylor's at the very bottom of the barrel. He's the least experienced, his competence has not been tested, his bravery has not been tested. None of the other men know if they can depend on him to preserve their lives, but they certainly don't give him the benefit of the doubt. The only person that displays some sort of empathy is Sergeant Elias. The battle between Elias and Barnes is the most important battle of the entire film, and by the end of it, only 3 bullets are fired. The battle is incredible because as the audience, we can see why the soldiers would align themselves with Barnes, who is the antagonist. Barnes is the most competent of anybody in the platoon, even Elias recognizes this, and all it takes is one look at his face to know his bravery. And Barnes is also not a complete psychopath. He's not Bunny. He feels the loss of his men. After the screw up with the Claymore at the beginning of the film, Barnes rips into the platoon for their idiocy, and if I was there hearing his words, I would be nodding along. He's a brutal man, but he makes everybody around him feel safer. Elias is equally as brave as Barnes, but he doesn't have the strict intensity. Barnes is unable to empathize with those who slow down the machine, as he calls it later in the film, but Elias doesn't have that problem. He's able to enjoy small moments outside of combat, and more importantly, he's always able to keep one foot outside of war. For the first part of the film, the impressionable Taylor is captivated by Barnes' qualities as a soldier, and he probably should be. But after the death of King, Taylor gets to see the true nature of Sergeant Barnes. Witnessing cruelty makes people cruel. Everybody in the platoon wants revenge for what happened to their brothers, especially Barnes, and to get that satisfaction, they do a couple of things. Number one, everybody in the village is guilty as charged. They convince themselves that they're looking at the culprits. And the best example of this is Bunny.
I bet you the old bitch runs the whole fucking show, man. She probably cut Manny's throat. She'd probably cut my balls off if she had the chance.
The second thing they do is adopt the Kurtz philosophy of obeying your primordial instincts when in war. Now, not to say that Kurtz would agree with what they do, but they expose a key problem with his idea, in my opinion. Being an animal is helpful when you're face to face with the enemy in combat, but when you're not, it's not an easy mode of being to turn off. Kurtz, of course, believed it was possible for men to love and be rational when the environment permitted it. And this is where the question of courage enters the picture. All of the men are pissed off, they're exhausted, and they snap. The big turning point is Barnes killing the woman, and when this happens, Taylor wakes up. Instinctually, he knows they've gone too far. And then Barnes takes a little girl. And look at how not only Taylor responds, but look at how the lieutenant responds.
This is his daughter, right? Right?
The lieutenant and Taylor both want to speak up, but they just do not have the courage. They both know Barnes is representing the anger of the platoon, and they both know that Barnes is the last guy in Vietnam you want to cross. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at its testing point, which means at the point of highest reality." I think he's absolutely right. The lieutenant would probably be described as a pretty stand-up guy back in America, respectful, considerate, just, many things. But it's not until those virtues are tested that we learn what type of man he really is. And the same can be said about Taylor, although as a low rank, I have more sympathy for him. Only Elias shows courage in the scene. He stands up to Barnes and eventually pays the price for it, but he shows the men of the platoon that courage is not just shown through laying your life on the line. Courage is not just standing up to the enemy. Courage, as C.S. Lewis says, is the ultimate display of virtue. And just like cruelty breeds cruelty, courage breeds courage. Elias becomes Taylor's ideal, and then when Taylor sees the other men raping two girls, he doesn't keep his mouth shut. He stands up for what he believes is right, despite knowing he isn't going to win any friends in the process. And during this scene, he delivers one of my favorite lines of the entire movie.
What is this, huh? You homosexual, Taylor? What the fuck is your problem, Taylor? She's a fucking thing. She's a fucking human being, man!
Taylor speaks for many in the audience at that moment, and he's going against one of the big dangers of war, I think. I can imagine that seeing death so often, seeing the fragility of the human body, it could diminish the special value of human life. That unique quality which is inherent to universal human rights and ideas of a similar nature. Judeo-Christian philosophy describes it coming from being made in the image of God. After the events at the village, a few soldiers discuss what happened, and one of them says, Barnes was right, they're all VC, he knows what he's talking about. But Harold is honest and admits, I don't know what they were, but I'm feeling real bad inside. And that feeling he has, that's the feeling you get when you violate that special human quality. You may not even understand it, but it's there, and Harold feels it. Once Elias and Barnes really start butting heads, half the platoon sides with Elias, and the other half goes with Barnes. Whoever each soldier decides is the symbol of courage is the man they choose. Elias is the symbol if you take Lewis's definition of courage, but others go with Barnes's version. Barnes has been shot 7 times and he's still there. Barnes will do whatever it takes to be victorious. There is nothing that will scare him away from accomplishing his mission. Many soldiers see that as the ultimate form of courage and decide to follow him. And that is not irrational by any means. But I do think Elias is the more courageous man. My favorite line of the entire movie comes from Elias, and I think it touches upon the entire debate in a way. We hear Taylor tell his grandma that he's having trouble seeing the difference between right and wrong, and of course the village scene was a serious moral dilemma, so it sets up this description of the stars perfectly.
It's a beautiful night.
Yeah, I love this place at night. The stars. There's no right or wrong in them. They're just there.
That's a nice way of putting it.
That is the beauty of nature, isn't it? It's simple. It's easy to understand. You look at a human being, there could be a million thoughts flying through their brain, a lot of contradictions as well. But you look at the stars, or a bird. Their nature is never hidden. And that's the curse of being awake, of being human. Our lives are filled with so many questions and mysteries, debates about right and wrong. Animals and plants are free from that burden. You're not going to hear your Venus flytrap give you a soliloquy on moral philosophy. But living like an animal, living like we don't need to think about these questions, it's an alluring proposition, even outside of war, but it's dangerous. When Barnes says, I am reality, and Kurt says, soldiers need to be able to kill without judgment, they're saying very similar things. Barnes is telling Taylor and the others, there's a way things ought to be, and the way things are. The way I operate in this war is necessary. He scolds Elias and the politicians for trying to fight with one hand tied to their balls. With the politicians, he has a point because they're restrained by politics, but Elias is restrained by his own morals. The death of Elias is heartbreaking. The smile he gives Barnes, that look of, I know we have issues, but we're still brothers in arms fighting the enemy, and I'm glad to see you out here. And then he's betrayed. Brutal, brutal stuff. And the cinematography is phenomenal as well. But Barnes does not get away with it, and I'm curious if Oliver Stone was making a little point about fate with his death. Barnes is a born survivor, shot 7 times, but shortly after turning his weapon on his own comrade, a ninth circle of hell offense, he's killed. Kind of like he took the one fruit he was supposed to refrain from. When Taylor heads back home after killing Barnes, we get a beautiful final monologue about what he saw and what he learned from everything, and he's speaking with a clear mind here.
I think now, looking back, we did not fight the enemy. We fought ourselves. And the enemy was in us.
The enemy was in us. If there is any one sentence that could sum up the overarching message of Platoon, FMJ, and Apocalypse Now, that would be it. And Taylor's stated desire to find meaning and goodness in his life after everything that has happened, it's a much more hopeful ending than what we get in the other 2 films. You could argue it wraps things up a little bit too tidily, but I like the clear moral statement. It's the Elias part of him speaking. Alright, that is Platoon, directed by Oliver Stone. If you enjoyed this analysis, I have a 2-part video on FMJ here for you, and one on Apocalypse Now as well. And remember to subscribe and like the video on your way out. I will be doing another analysis soon, although I may be moving to a different war. But thank you so much for stopping by. Have a fantastic rest of your day. I will talk to you soon.